written a book called In the Shadow of Freedom, and Laxmi is here with me today. Laxmi, thank you for coming here, and tell us a little bit about how your parents met and why there was opposition to their relationship.
My mother was in Sevagram in Gandhiji's ashram, looking after the Mahila ashram, which is the ladies section. And she came home to Belgaum, where her parents lived, and she met the very debonair and German-returned Dr. Tendulkar, who had come back from Germany before the war started and had started a newspaper in Belgaum. Now, she had been asked by the Gandhian leaders there to write a report on labor workers and child occupation. So she had written an article and she wanted to get it published. So she went to this newspaper that Dr. Tendulkar, my father, had started to get it printed. But they met, and that's how the whole story began.
Why was there opposition to this courting?
My mother came from a very conservative Brahmin family, and my grandfather was opposing her alliance with Dr. Tendulkar because he had been married before. He was actually married to a German, although it was not official because no German could marry a non-German at that time. But she was a well-known German playwright known as Thea van Harbo, filmmaker. And so he got very upset when my mother was seeing him and spending so much time with him. And it went to the extent that he had to ask her to leave the house, not only because this displeased him, but because she was a member of the Indian Congress Party. Her three brothers who had tried to enroll with the army, which was then the British Army, were thrown out because their sister was a Congress Party member.
They were supporters of Gandhi's anti-colonialist movement.
My mother was, but the brothers wanted to join the army, which was the British Army, because it was a British Raj going on. So the army officers threw them out because they had a sister in the Congress Party.
And how did Mahatma Gandhi, the leader of the opposition at that time, get involved in your parents' relationship?
My grandfather ultimately asked my mother to leave the house because she was not willing to give up meeting my father. And she left the house and she went to a small village called Belgundi, where my father had a small house and land. And she started working there, doing the same kind of work she had done in Sevagram, which was helping women, educating children, teaching them about cleanliness. Shortly thereafter, my father was put into prison. He was a political détenu because the war had started. The British was in war with Germany, and
This is the World War.
the World War II, and anybody who was associated with Germany and lived in India was detained by the British. And my grandfather tried very hard to get her to come home because the conditions in the village were pathetic. There was no water, there was no road, there was no money. And so he requested her several times, and she didn't listen. And so then finally he knew Gandhiji because Gandhiji had come to Belgaum several times. And he wrote a letter to Gandhiji thinking that if somebody as important and somebody who my mother revered so much like Gandhiji would intercede on his behalf, at least the daughter would come home again. So Gandhiji wrote a letter to my mother and said, come and meet me. So my mother then went to Gandhiji's ashram, met Gandhiji, met Madhavbhai Desai and all these people, and told her whole story as it was.
And what did Gandhi do in reaction? Did he help them or did he try to stop them from this
Well, he
love
was
affair?
quite shocked at my mother being so forthright and outright in telling her the truth. And she told him that she was living with my father, with Dr. Tendulkar. And of course, that was way back in 1939. And that she wanted to marry him. So Gandhiji was very, very upset. And he said to her, he said, Beta, you have sinned against society. And you will have to atone for this. And also you will have to get a letter from the German wife saying that she had no objection to your getting married.
Because your father was technically still married.
Technically married, but because of the war, I don't think he could have gone back. And it was not a formal wedding. And also Thea van Harbo, my father's former wife, was 17 years senior to him. And she loved India. She had written a book which became a film called Das Indische Grabmal. And she also was very keen that my father go back to India and start industry in India, because she believed that what India really required once the British would leave it would be industry.
So what conditions did Gandhi put on your parents' relationship?
Gandhiji put the condition that they were not to meet for 5 years. And if my father was released before the 5 years were over, they were not to meet until the stipulated time was over. And also, this condition was a bit of a shock. And they the war went on for almost 4.5 to 5 years. So when they went to Gandhi and they said, "Now get us married," he told them that he wanted the marriage to be aimed towards service for the country. And finally, he told them that they should adhere to a marriage which had celibacy in it. My father refused. He says, nobody can deny Indu, which is my mother, the right to have children. So then Gandhiji said, okay, then don't have children till independence. That was in 44, and finally we got independence from the British in 1947. So they adhered to that.
Why do you think Gandhi was so personally involved or interested in the story of your parents?
Two things. First of all, I think he was close to my grandfather and he grew to be very fond of my mother. But I think also this was another situation where I don't know why great men do things, but I think maybe this was a situation which came to him firsthand, and I guess this was one of his experiments with truth, as he called it.
But your mother was also a very strong-headed woman. She defied both her father and Mahatma Gandhi at some point. Why do you think she did that?
I think she was quite powerless. And since my father was in prison, and then she was also in prison for 2 years, and I think the events and history just carried them on. And 5 years passed very quickly. And I think she felt that she really did love Gandhiji a very lot, and I think she felt that Gandhiji's approval and Gandhiji's blessings would give a lot of credibility to their relationship, and she could start life in a more honorable way, and not have small petty people in Belgaum gossip about her as they did.
And your father, of course, had a whole different life before your mother. He was married 3 other times, one of them to the very famous Thea von Harbo. What kind of person was he?
He was a brilliant man. He went to Germany when he was 22 years old, and he did his PhD. He did his various degrees in engineering, and he also worked in the German newspaper, the Berliner Tageblatt, for several years, reporting on the Quit India movement of Gandhiji in India. And I think he was a very unusual man because, coming from the humble background that he did, he was able to be involved with a lady who was at the height of her career and sophistication.
Thank you very much. Laxmi Dhaul. Stay with us on BBC World Service.